Labeled as unsupported for the Steam Deck, the Halo Master Chief Collection is a compilation of 6 Halo games that are all fantastic and have great campaigns that actually do play on the Steam Deck. In this video, I'll be covering the performance of all the campaigns for the games listed in this collection and the alternate graphics modes. As for Halo 2 and CE, they both have 2 graphic modes that you can use in the game. Before we get started here, I just want to say the Halo series is one of my favorite game series of all time. The first 3 games have a really special place on my heart, and Reach does too. I found the campaigns of these games to be endlessly replayable, so let's jump right into it. First off, I want to touch on why Master Chief Collection is labeled as unsupported for the Steam Deck. Now, the Steam Deck uses a compatibility layer called Proton to play games that are meant for Windows machines on Linux. Now, a lot of games anti-cheat doesn't really work well with this, and in this case, the anti-cheat system here does not work with Proton at all. Because of that, multiplayer is not an option here because anti-cheat's just busted. So when you launch the game, make sure you disable the anti-cheat system when you launch it. You don't want to have problems with your account possibly getting banned or anything. So I just launched it with anti-cheat disabled, but there's also a little bit more configuration we can do here with setting a specific version of Proton for the game. For all the gameplay you'll see today, I just use Proton 7. It's pretty easy to set this up using the compatibility tool for this game. Now, there were 2 issues I encountered. One was sometimes the game wouldn't launch, so when that happened, I would just launch it again, and it would actually go into game, so that's not a huge deal. The other one's a little bit more of a problem. On my end, when I started the game, the audio would be at a fine volume level, but when I actually got into the game a little bit, the audio would go down and become much quieter. Now on the Steam Deck, when playing handheld, the speakers got loud enough that I could actually hear the audio fine, and using headphones this wasn't a problem too, but this isn't going to be as loud as other games. I'm not totally sure what's causing this. I tried Proton GE and Proton Experimental, and both of them have this problem as well. I've included a little clip here of what this sounds like. It happens right when you launch the game and get into the main menu screen. Now we're launching right into the performance for Halo Combat Evolved. Now for this game, if you hit the back button, you can swap between the new graphics and the retro graphics. Here we'll start with the retro graphics, and both of them affect the battery life in different ways and have different performance demands. Here we hit 60 FPS extremely consistently, playing at 720p for my external monitor, and we have the upgraded graphics preset applied. The only stutters I noticed for this game were when we hit checkpoints, and that's something that happens for a lot of Halo games and a lot of games in general, so no real issues here. Battery life wise, we have pretty great performance here. I have just over 80% battery, and we get around 4 hours and 15 minutes of playtime. I am playing on an external monitor here, so if you're playing on your Steam Deck with your screen on, you might get a little bit less battery life overall, but you should still get great numbers. As we'll see pretty shortly, if you swap to the new graphics using the back button, the battery life is going to take a hit here, but we'll still be able to hit 60 FPS pretty consistently. I have a ton of nostalgia for this game because this is one of the first FPS games I really got into and made me want to get an Xbox in the first place when I played with my cousins. A lot of people have nostalgia for this game just like me, and because of that, they like the retro look better. The new look of the game has a pretty significant art style change, and for me and many others, we kind of prefer this more retro look. Speaking of the anniversary graphics update, here it is. This update was made for the Xbox 360 about 10 years after the release of the original game. If we look at the stats for the CPU and GPU, they're being used considerably more here, and that makes sense because this graphic style was made for the 360, whereas the original retro look was made for the original Xbox, so there's a lot more going on here visually. This increased CPU and GPU usage is going to affect our temperatures and battery life here. Now we're touching just around 80 degrees Celsius, whereas previously we were hitting around 60 degrees Celsius with the retro graphics. Our battery life has also taken a hit here. We have a pretty similar percentage for the battery, but our level is about cut in half. We have around 2 hours of battery life here, whereas previously we had around 4.5 hours. Performance-wise though, it's extremely similar. We hit 60 FPS basically all the time, except when you hit something like a checkpoint, where the game will stutter a little bit, and then you'll just continue on with your very fluid gameplay experience. For me, I want to play FPS games at the highest frame rate possible, but I understand on the Steam Deck, people might want to cut down on the frame rate to save on battery life. Here for the retro graphics, if we drop the game down to 30 FPS, we win about 30 minutes of battery life back. I think most people would probably opt for 40 FPS on the Steam Deck handheld, but unfortunately my capture card cannot capture that footage. Here for the anniversary graphics option, we also get about 30 minutes of battery life back. For me personally, I would probably opt for the higher frame rate and lose out on the battery life, but if you're on the go and every minute matters, you can cut it down to maybe 40 FPS to get a better gameplay experience than 30. Now we're moving along to Halo 2, and this game also did have an anniversary update, but this one was made for the Xbox One instead of the 360, and makes it more graphics intensive. I think there's a pretty common consensus that the anniversary graphics for Halo 2 are way better than the ones done for the original Halo game. They look really nice here, it's closer to the original art style, and I would definitely play in this way if I have the option. On top of that, there are amazing cutscenes in Halo 2 Anniversary Edition that are pre-recorded. They're done by Blur Studios, who does really amazing work here, and on the Steam Deck, there's no problem playing them back. I also wanted to mention that loading into the Halo 2 levels takes considerably longer than any of the other games here in the Master Chief Collection. This makes sense because it probably has the highest quality assets with the Anniversary Edition. It also has those pre-recorded cutscenes that it needs to play back. First, I'll be covering Halo 2 using the Anniversary graphics. These Anniversary graphics are probably the best out of any game in the Master Chief Collection, and as a result, it's probably the most demanding game I played here during the entire experience. That being said, on this Delta Halo level, we're hitting 60 FPS very consistently. There are some levels where I noticed the frame rate dropping a little bit below 60 FPS, but overall it was pretty consistent at hitting 60 FPS. If we look at the stats for our GPU and CPU here, we can see the GPU is being used pretty heavily right now, nearing max usage, but not totally at 100%. CPU-wise, we're around 50% on all the cores here. This is going to result in higher temperatures and also a lower battery life. For playtime, if you look at our battery percentage here, we're just over 70%, and that gives us just shy of an hour and a half of playtime on an external monitor. So this one's definitely going to chew up your Steam Deck's battery if you're playing at 60 FPS here on the go, with the graphics turned all the way up. This one looks amazing on the go on the Steam Deck. The graphics really pop here off the screen, but let's pop over to the retro graphics to see how they run now. So now we have the retro graphics here. Just like Halo CE, if you press the back button on the controller, you can swap on the fly between the two graphics modes. If you look at our CPU and GPU usage, they have definitely dropped significantly, giving us lower temperatures and far improved battery life. Now, Halo 2 was created for the Xbox originally, so it makes sense that this version is far easier to run than the enhanced version, which was made for the Xbox One. The battery life is still adjusting a little bit here, but when it all settled out, it was around 3.5 hours of battery life at a 70% battery level. I think the original graphics for Halo 2 still look quite nice. It definitely looks a lot better than the original Halo CE did, and it really pushed the original Xbox hardware. So if you want to maximize your battery life on the go while still hitting 60 FPS, definitely swap over to the classic graphics here, because it'll give you far better battery life. Locking the anniversary graphics down to 30 FPS lightens the GPU load up significantly here and brings our temperatures down slightly. This mode will give you about 20 to 30 minutes more of battery life. If you lock the classic graphics down to 30 FPS, we see a pretty good improvement in battery life, around 40 to 50 minutes. So if you're on the go, maybe lock this one down to 40 FPS, and you can play in the classic graphics for a very long period of time. One other thing I wanted to test was dropping the graphics quality down from enhanced to original. This game is probably one of the harder ones to run for the Master Chief Collection, and usually you hit 60 FPS, but sometimes it can drop below. Doing this and dropping it to original really smoothed out the frame rate, so if you ever have problems hitting that 60 FPS, try dropping this down, and you should really hit it all the time when you do this. This won't necessarily win you back any battery life. Most of the battery life problems from this one are coming from the CPU being used significantly, and not necessarily from the GPU. Now we're moving along to Halo 3. Halo 3 holds an extremely dear place in my heart. I played this game a ton growing up, and I've never been so hyped for a game launch, maybe besides Skyrim, as I was for Halo 3. As far as graphical enhancements go, Halo 3 didn't receive a direct anniversary upgrade like Halo 1 and Halo 2 have gotten. Maybe down the line that'd be nice, but for now, Halo 3 saw shader and lighting improvements primarily in the Master Chief Collection. Here we have Halo 3 running at 60 FPS, and it's able to hit it very consistently. Now, the GPU usage was a lot higher than I was actually expecting, but I am using the enhanced graphic preset here. Later on, I'll go through the original graphics preset, and the GPU usage does come down quite a bit. I definitely find the lighting to look nicer here in the enhanced graphics preset versus the original one. So maybe you can mix and match settings so you can use the enhanced textures while using the original lighting to save on GPU performance. Overall though, you're going to be hitting 60 FPS basically all the time here regardless of the preset that you pick. When it comes to battery life, we're getting a little bit worse performance here than I was hoping for. At 60% battery level, we're getting around an hour and 10 minutes of battery life, which is not the greatest. I'll lock the frame rate down to 30 FPS now to see what kind of battery life improvements we can get. With a 30 FPS lock, we're able to get 30 to 40 minutes more battery life than we are with 60 FPS, and if you look at our GPU usage, it is significantly lower here than it was at 60 FPS. Look to lock this one down to 40 FPS on the go if you want better battery life and smoother performance at 30 FPS. Now, I also wanted to experiment here and drop the Halo 3 settings down from enhanced to original and see what kind of performance we'd get. Here, our GPU usage is much lower than when using the enhanced graphic preset, and that definitely makes sense if the enhanced one has upgraded shaders and lighting. We are getting a little bit better battery life here using this versus the enhanced graphic preset, but not a ton. I'd say this is primarily if you want the Steam Deck to run a little bit cooler, or if you have some problem hitting 60 FPS on the enhanced version, which you really shouldn't have, to be honest with you. Moving along here, we have Halo 3 ODST. The campaign for ODST is probably the Halo campaign I've played the least overall. I beat it one time and then called it quits there. Now, I don't think this one has the same graphical enhancements with the lighting and shaders that the Halo 3 version on MCC got. Here I'm using the enhanced graphical preset, but the GPU usage is significantly lower than it was in Halo 3 using that enhanced graphical preset. Now, this might be because we're in a very dark environment, it's not as big as a Halo 3 environment, so maybe that has something to do with it. Performance-wise, once again, we get a very solid 60 FPS here, and as far as battery life goes, around 50% battery life here. We're getting about an hour and 10 minutes of playtime, so a slightly better battery life than Halo 3, but not a ton. Locking our frame rate down to 30 FPS here for ODST didn't really help our battery life out at all. One thing I do notice is that sometimes one of our CPU cores jumps up to 100% here, and that happens on a couple other Halo games too. So I suspect that this is a culprit for the battery life being used so heavily in some of these games where it seems like it should be a lot better than it is. Now we have Halo Reach, the last Halo game made by Bungie. The graphics in this game are definitely a step forward from Halo 3, but this one still runs on the Xbox 360 originally. As far as graphical updates for the Master Chief Collection go, I don't know the specifics about what was done to Halo Reach. It definitely didn't get an anniversary update like Halo 1 or 2, but I don't even think it got the lighting or shader update like Halo 3 got. Performance-wise, Halo Reach once again hits 60 FPS very consistently here on the Steam Deck. Here I'm using the enhanced graphical preset in the options menu, and if we look at our CPU and GPU usage, they are noticeably lower than Halo 3 when that game is also using the enhanced graphical preset. Despite not really getting any graphical updates, Reach still has a very nice art style that holds up well to this day. As far as battery life is concerned, I have about 40% battery level in this video, and I have around 45 minutes of playtime remaining. This should get you around 2 hours of playtime on the go when playing at 60 FPS. Similar to what we saw in Halo 3 ODST, when we lock this game down to 30 FPS, our GPU usage does drop a good amount, but our battery life doesn't really change at all from when we're using 60 FPS. You'll see a slight improvement here, but nothing major. Since the battery life doesn't seem to be affected by locking the frame rate down for this one, I would recommend sticking to 60 FPS for handheld gameplay here. Now we have the last game here in the Master Chief Collection, and that's Halo 4. This one is developed by 343 and not Bungie. The art style in Halo 4 is a pretty big departure from what we saw in previous Halo games, but I think the graphics hold up pretty nicely here on the Steam Deck in modern times. There are definite criticisms of Halo 4, but I still think the campaign for this one's pretty fun, and I had a ton of fun playing the multiplayer back in the day. Now, I don't believe Halo 4 received any major graphical updates for the Master Chief Collection either, just allowing it to render at modern resolutions and maybe with higher texture quality. Once again, Halo 4 was developed for the Xbox 360, and here I'm using the enhanced graphical preset. Now, I'm actually pretty impressed with the performance for this one. Visually, I think Halo 4 looks like one of the better games in the collection. The art style might not agree with everybody, but it's hard to disagree that the raw graphical fidelity here is enhanced over some of the other Halo games. Frame rate wise, we're hitting a very consistent 60 FPS once again for this game. If we look at our GPU usage, it's hovering around 50% a lot of the time and then spiking up to 80% during demanding scenarios. This gives us pretty good temperatures, hanging around the 70 degrees Celsius mark and even in the mid-60s. In regards to CPU usage, I didn't see any of those cores spike up to 100% like we saw in some of the other games, and I think this is helping our battery life out overall. Our battery life is around 43% now, giving us just under an hour and a half of battery performance. For this one, you can probably play around just under 2.5 hours on the go, which I think is pretty good, playing at 60 FPS for a game that looks this good. Locking Halo 4 down to 30 FPS will help our temps and battery life out a little bit. Battery life wise, we're getting around 20 to 30 minutes more battery life performance here, and our temps have dropped a little bit. One final thing I wanted to touch on was the file size for Halo the Master Chief Collection. Now I have every campaign installed here, and it's using around 107 gigabytes on my micro SD card. Now the nice thing about this game is that you can manage what campaigns you want installed and if you want the multiplayers installed or not. Here, since anti-cheat is broken, we're not going to install any of the multiplayers, which should save a little bit of space, and you can just manage what campaigns you want to play at a time. So if you're just playing like Halo 2, just install that campaign, and that'll save you a lot of disk space. That's about all for the Master Chief Collection on the Steam Deck, guys. I love the Halo franchise so much, and those first 3 games and Reach are just so dear to me. I played them so much growing up, and going back now and playing the campaigns on my Steam Deck, it just brings me back to my childhood, and if I showed myself in middle school all the games running handheld on the Steam Deck, my mind would just be blown. I'd be like, this is the best device ever. If you want to check out more Steam Deck or gaming content, check out my YouTube channel, and I really appreciate everybody that comes back from my subscriber list and watches these videos as they come out. I have a bunch of links down in the description now. I have a website, a Twitter, and other links to check out more of my content. Thanks for watching.